How many of you know who State Kate Stanley is, or rather was, because she's dead now? If you've been watching the news for the last 18 months or so, you know she was a 32-year-old medical device representative who was shot and killed by an illegal immigrant from Mexico for no apparent reason. He says it was an accident, but, you know, he was a career criminal. He is a career criminal who had previously been deported from the United States not once, not twice, but 5 times. She and her father was out for a walk at a tourist attraction area at the Embarcadero waterfront district in San Francisco. He fired 3 shots from a stolen gun, which he had stolen from the vehicle of a land management officer's car. And one of the shots, of course, hit and killed Miss Stanley. This man, Juan Francisco Lopez Sanchez, he had been deported from the United States a total of 5 times, most recently in 2009. He was on probation from Texas at the time of the shooting and had 7 felony convictions against him. Why this fella wasn't thrown under the jail and left there to rot is beyond me. Nevertheless, he was free and walking around when all this happened. Sanchez arrived to the United States somewhere before 1991, the year he was convicted of his first drug charge in Arizona. In 1993, 2 years later, he was convicted 3 times in Washington State for felony heroin possession and manufacturing narcotics. Following another drug conviction and jail term, this time in Oregon, the U.S. Immigration and Naturalization Service deported Sanchez in June 1994. However, he returned to the U.S. within 2 years and was convicted again of a heroin possession in Washington State. He was deported for the second time in 1997. And on February 2nd, 1998, he was deported for a third time after re-entering the U.S. through Arizona. United States Border Patrol caught him 6 days later at a border crossing, and a federal court sentenced Sanchez to 5 years, 3 months in federal prison for unauthorized reentry. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE they are called, deported Sanchez in 2003 for his 4th deportation. However, he re-entered the U.S. through the Texas border and got another federal prison sentence for re-entering before being deported for the 5th time in June 2009. Less than 3 months after his 5th deportation, he was caught attempting to cross the border again in Eagle Pass, Texas. He pleaded guilty to a felony reentry, and upon sentencing, a federal court recommended that he be placed in a federal medical facility as soon as possible. Now, I'm going to tell you now why he was out walking around when he killed Miss Stanley. On March the 26th, 2015, at the request of the San Francisco's Sheriff's Department, the United States Bureau of Prisons turned Sanchez over to the San Francisco authorities for an outstanding drug warrant. Now, they took him out of prison and took him to jail in San Francisco. ICE, or the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, they issued a detainer for Sanchez requesting that he be kept in custody until the immigration authorities could pick him up. San Francisco, however, is a sanctuary city, and it has limited cooperation with the federal immigration authorities. So after he had pulled his jail time in San Francisco, instead of turning him over to the federal custom agents, they turned him back out on the street. You know, a man with a rap sheet like that, they should know better. Anyone should know better that he's just going to get in trouble again. And, you know, until all this transpired in the news, I didn't even know we had such places in the United States called sanctuary cities, or in some instances, entire counties. But, you know, come to find out, there are several states that have sanctuary cities or counties here in the United States. There's California, Connecticut, New Mexico, Colorado, Arizona, Florida, and Georgia. And there's not one or two cities. There are literally hundreds of them. And these cities and counties all have policies in place that limit cooperation with the U.S. immigration authorities. They say they have these policies because it strengthens community safety by disallowing local officials from questioning a resident's immigration status, thus enabling local victims of crime to report a crime without fear of deportation. That's nothing but hogwash, folks. And I don't think I have to describe to you what hogwash is. It's not something you wash a hog with. More than 200 jurisdictions have refused requests from the federal government to detain individuals for deportation from this country. 18 counties and cities in California alone. 300 sanctuary cities and counties have rejected more than 17,000 requests from ICE, the immigration people, to retain people for deportation between January the 1st, 2014 and September 2015, in 1 year's time. And that's not counting all of which have been rejected up to now. You know, here we are in 2017. Now, what does that have to do with the Bible? Or, if anything. What does that have to do with God's judgment? Well, believe it or not, when the Israelites crossed over the Jordan River and came into the Promised Land, the Lord Himself instructed the Israelites that there were to be sanctuary cities. Cities of refuge, they were called. So let's take a look at how these cities were to be used in biblical days as opposed to the purpose of which they are now being used. Today they are used by these illegal immigrants, many of which are criminals, to hide out from the immigration authorities so they won't be deported. Now, but what was their purpose in the Bible? Numbers 35. Back to Numbers 35. Numbers in my Bible somewhere. Numbers 35. $32, I'm getting there. $34. $35. Now here the Lord was speaking to Moses concerning the Levites. Because the Levites, the whole tribe of the Levites, were set apart, if you'll remember, to take care of the tabernacle and the work of the Lord. And they didn't receive any great inheritance of land, great parcels of land, like the other tribes did. Here the Lord is telling Moses what to do concerning the Levites in chapter 35, starting verse 1. It says, "And the Lord came to Moses in the plains of Moab by Jordan, near Jericho."
Excuse me.
The Lord spake unto Moses in the plains of Moab by Jordan, near Jericho, and saying, "Command the children of Israel that they give unto the Levites of the inheritance of their possession cities to dwell in, And you shall give also unto the Levites suburbs for the cities round about them. And the city shall they have to dwell in. And the suburbs of them shall be for their cattle, and for their goods, and for all their animals. And the suburbs of the cities which you shall give unto them, the Levites, shall reach from the wall of the city outward 1,000 cubits around about. And then verse 6. And among the cities which you shall give unto the Levites, there shall be 6 cities for refuge, which you shall appoint for the manslayer, that he may flee there, and to them you shall add 42 cities. So, the Levites were to have 48 cities in all to live in, and 6 of those cities, it says, were to be for the manslayer, someone who had killed someone else. Now let's read on. Verse 10. Speak unto the children of Israel, and say unto them, when you come over Jordan into the land of Canaan, then you shall appoint you cities to be cities of refuge for you, that the slayer may flee there, which kills any man at unawares. At unawares. These cities were for someone who killed someone by accident, people, not as they are used today. They were a place for him to go and live in safety from the members of the dead person's family, who may, in the heat of anger, kill him in revenge, until the time the congregation, or rather the proper authorities, could look at the situation and make a proper judgment in the matter. This is confirmed in Deuteronomy 19, 2 through 6, which says, you shall separate 3 cities for you in the midst of your land, which the Lord your God gives you to possess it. You shall prepare you a way, and divide the coast of your land, which the Lord your God gives you to inherit, into 3 parts, and every slayer may flee there. And this is the case of the slayer, which shall flee there, that he may live. Whosoever kills his neighbor ignorantly, it says, whom he hated not in times past. That's when, and he gives an example here. He says it's when a man goes out into the woods with his neighbor to hew wood. Got 2 guys going out in the wood to chop wood, or out in the woods to cut wood. And his hand fetches a stroke with the axe to cut down the tree. And the head slips from the handle and lights upon his neighbor. Man takes the axe, he's chopping, and the axe head flies off, and it hits his neighbor in the head, and it kills him. He said, he shall flee unto one of these cities and live, lest the avenger of the blood pursue the slayer, while his heart is hot, and overtake him, because the way is long, and slay him, whereas he was not worthy of death, insomuch he hated him not in times past. So it wasn't a place to hide from the law, as they are now used, these sanctuary cities, but a place to live in safety until proper judgment could be rendered. Now, there was also a law at that time. If a man was murdered, it was the obligation of the deceased next of kin, if he was murdered now, intentionally, if the deceased next of kin to kill that murderer, if he ran across him. Now, he couldn't go out and seek him and hide and wait for him, but if he ran across him somewhere, it was his duty to do it. And as we go on down through chapter 35 here, it explains all this. But since it can be a little hard to understand in the King James Version, I'm going to paraphrase it for you. But by all means, when you have time to read it and absorb what it says, check up on me. Make sure I'm telling you the truth. It teaches us here in chapter 35 that the willful murder should be punished with death. That's what it tells us here. And that in no case, no sanctuary should be allowed for him. No ransom taken, nor any alteration of punishment was to be accepted. Where wrong has been done, restitution must be made. And since the murderer cannot restore the life he has taken, wrongfully taken, his own must be taken from him in lieu of it, to satisfy the law and justice of a nation, and to be a warning to all others to do likewise. Not only the prosecution, but the execution of the murderer was committed to the next of kin, who, as he was to be the redeemer of his kinsman's estate, if it were to be mortgaged, so he was to be the avenger of his blood, if in fact he were murdered. Verse 19 here tells us, the avenger of blood shall put the murderer to death. But if the homicide was not voluntary, nor done intentionally, if it was not done, if it was done without hostility or unintentionally, verse 22 and 23 here, not seeing the person nor intending to harm him, which our law today calls change or homicide through misfortune. In these cases, there were cities of refuge appointed for the manslayer to flee. And concerning the cities of refuge, the law was, number one, if a man killed another in these cities, he was safe and under protection by the law till he had trial, till he could come to trial before the assembly or before the judges in open court. Number two, if on trial he was found to be a willful murderer, the city of refuge should no longer protect him. As it is today, the judgment was clear. Take him away and put him to death. And if that were done today, there would be a whole lot less murders in this country. But if it were found to be by error or accident that the blow was given without any plot against the life of the person slain or any other, then the manslayer should continue in safety in the city of refuge, and the avenger of blood might not meddle with him any longer. Verse 25 tells us, there he was to remain in banishment from his own house and property till the death of the high priest. So, again, number one, by the preservation of the life of the manslayer, God would teach us, that man ought not to suffer death for death when it is accidental. But, even at that, there was still some punishment for what happened. Number two, for by the banishment of the manslayer from his own city and his own property, and his confinement to the city of refuge, God would teach us to have a dread and horror of the guilt of blood, and to be very careful with another person's life. Number three, and by the limiting of the time of the offender's banishment to the death until the death of the high priest, that sacred office was also honored. The cities of refuge, being all of them Levite cities, the high priest, being the head of that tribe, those that were confined to them might properly be looked on as his prisoners because they were banished there. And so only at his death could they be discharged from that city. So these sanctuary cities here in the United States are not being used properly, folks. They are not a place for people to live in safety until proper judgment can be determined. Rather, they are a place for criminals to hide from the law and to escape punishment. For they know the local authorities will not turn them over to the federal authorities for proper judgment. The president says he's going to, and maybe already has, I don't know, sign an executive order to withhold federal funding from these cities and counties who will not cooperate with the immigration officials, and rightly so. If they will not cooperate in the matter of these illegal aliens, criminals, then they shouldn't get federal funds. It's a shame what happened to that young woman, all because of the policies of the city of San Francisco and the failed judgment of our government, which should tell us as followers of Christ we should pray fervently for his coming.